Yeah, I love hearing people's favorite dinosaurs. Also, remember, all living birds are dinosaurs, so you can, in fact, just say a chicken, and it can be the right answer. I'm also in New Mexico, so the person who said they're from New Mexico, hi from one of the few other Jews that live in this state. Okay, should I just get started?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome to Studying Sacred Time, the Jewish side of paleontology. Again, my name is Meig Dickson. I recognize the Meig might throw you. Believe it or not, that's the Scottish spelling of the nickname Meig. It's not more complicated than that. So there you go. So first, I'm going to talk about what is paleontology, because you'd be surprised how many people don't really know what it is. So this is a Jewish dinosaur that my friend drew, that I use in lots of things. So
we can't see. You have to resume the. I would try resharing or resuming the slideshow.
Resharing. Oh dear. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see it now?
You got it.
Awesome. Okay, so what is paleontology? Paleontology is specifically the study of life before history, so prehistoric life. History is usually defined as when writing started, because the historical techniques people use to study history differ based on whether or not what they're studying has writing or no writing. And needless to say, most living things throughout history have not had writing. So prehistoric life covers pretty much everything. So it's really the history of nature, the history of our Earth, and the life that has lived on it throughout time in what is usually called deep time. So paleontology has been practiced by many people throughout history, not always particularly well, but we do have many examples of different groups doing different types of paleontology. One unpublished example, I'm still waiting on the paper, is about how particular Native Americans from the Midwest region actually did some paleontology on various fossils of like shelly things back well before Columbus went across the ocean. So we have lots of examples of paleontology across history, and Jewish people are included in that. So we actually do have examples of Jewish paleontology in Roman times, which is extremely fascinating. So in a paper published last year called The Bones of Giants by Alicia and Stephen Fine, during the Roman period, Roman and Greek Gentiles often had philosophical writings on the origins of large bones that they found, because people wandered, they found large fossilized bones, and they didn't know what they were. And Romans and Greeks usually thought that they were the bones of giants. Jewish scholars also had similar conclusions because they were drawing on what they knew, and what they knew were the writings about the giants of old from the Torah. So the Dead Sea Scrolls community had, in fact, an entire book about giants, and the famous writer Josephus connected the bones to humans, even drew sketches of them, but he did acknowledge that they didn't look like people bones, which was much more than anyone else would do at the time in his world. There are also large bones talked about in the Talmud, such as bones in caves near Jerusalem, including large teeth, which were also interpreted as giants. And in fact, the decline from giant size to today's side was seen as part of the decline in humanity from Adam. And there's even a very large passage in the Talmud about how you can go from Adam, who was as tall as the sky, to the rabbi writing the description, and it's just a descending thing of size. So obviously, people were finding these bones, and they were trying to interpret them with what they knew at the time, which was giants. Now, that didn't mean that Jewish scholars didn't think about deep time or how old the world was. The time before Adam and the time after Adam in the creation story in the Torah was conceptualized differently, especially by rabbis in the Gemara. These 6 days of creation are commonly treated as metaphorical or allegorical within Talmudic writings, as we see in Hagiga 11b through 12. Radak, commentator Rabbi David Kimchi from 1160 to 1236, discusses the need of derivatives to enact creation. He talks about how species change over time via descent. And he treats the day in the creation story as metaphorical. And this is well before Darwin was ever born. Kabbalah often discusses the time before creation, and creation is seen as less when the world starts and more when humanity starts. In fact, Kabbalah discusses the world as having 4 cycles of perfection, with us currently in the 4th one. So there were 4 different epochs that God decided to end and then start again. And this is fascinating, as we will see later. So, when evolution was discovered, while much of the Christian world responded with anger and being appalled, Jewish responses were actually usually more positive. Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz was delighted by the discovery of fossil life. He brought up the epics from Kabbalah and talked about how the 4 cycles of perfection can be assigned to roughly the 4 periods of life that we knew about at the time: the Precambrian, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. And so he saw new knowledge of deep time as confirming Judaism, not contradicting it, because of the vagueness of the timing of those 6 days of the creation story. So Rabbi Yitzhak HaKohen Cook, a little bit later on, wrote the book For the Perplexed of the Generation in, memoriam of Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. And he talks about how evolution is the process that Hashem used to create the world, and the elegance of that process and the changes that occur and how well it helps animals adapt to life was proof of Hashem, not contradicting it. So in modern paleontology, because of these things, there are lots of Jewish people who are visibly Jewish and religious in paleontology, more so than other religious groups. Many Jewish people across the religious spectrum, from secular to Orthodox, go into paleontology. The way I usually understand it is because we find time sacred in this religion. We mark time as sacred rather than places in most situations. And studying time is a way to honor time. So by studying the deep past and everything that has existed over the history of life, we are honoring time, which we find sacred. And the conflict between religion and science is just not as common in Jewish circles in this case. While young earth creationism, the idea that the earth is literally 6,000 years old, is believed in some communities, that is not the rule. Many Jewish communities embrace evolutionary science and paleontology, with dinosaurs being used in Jewish day school, and even paleontology-themed Hebrew school parties happening at various locations, including the Hebrew school I taught at, but before I taught there, which was very amusing for me. So we're now going to talk about some famous modern Jewish paleontologists. The first one we're going to talk about is Joanna Tilly Eiger. She is considered the mother of paleoneurology, which I'll get into in a second. So Johanna Gabrielle Tilly Eiger, or Tilly Eiger, was born in 1897. She sadly died in 1967. She was born in Germany. She emigrated to the United States, mostly because of her scientific title. She was able to find a job. Her older sister was a medical doctor, so they escaped together, but she did lose most of her family in the Shoah. She started her career in Germany and ended up at Harvard Comparative Zoology. She was also hard of hearing throughout her entire life and required interpreters and help during her career, but that did not diminish her contributions in the slightest. So she founded the field of paleoneurology, and you might be wondering how we can study the brains of things that are so dead, their bones aren't even bones anymore. The process of fossilization essentially turns bones into rock. And the fun thing is that skulls have the impression of the brain inside. And this feature is called an endocast. And so this endocast is preserved within the skull and actually shows the shape of the brain as well as its external surface. And so what Tilly did was realize that this external surface is actually able to accurately preserve what the brain looked like by comparing with living animals and their endocasts. So she showed how you can study the endocast to determine general brain function, since usually similar parts are in similar places compared to living animals. She also talked about convergent evolution in the evolution of brains. So what is convergent evolution? It is when two populations that are not closely related to one another evolve similar features to do similar things. And so, for example, bat wings and bird wings are two different structures, but they are convergently similar to one another because they're both evolved for flight. She showed how different groups of organisms, such as reptiles versus mammals, actually evolved similar ways to tackle problems with the brain separately. And so you can see in her work a lot of things that are actually quite ahead of her time, including doubting the idea that you can simply look at an animal's brain size compared to its body size and determine its intelligence, which had been the prevailing theory since the 1800s. What we now know that she didn't have access to is that a lot of animals have different density of neuronal, so brain cell connections in their heads. And so that actually impacts their intelligence, making the simple correlation of brain size to body size inaccurate for most living things. For example, birds have about 60% more neuronal connections in their brain than mammals do on average. So she was significantly ahead of her time in terms of thinking about animal intelligence. But that wasn't all that she'd accomplished. We're going to talk a bit more about this later, but she was a major proponent of the idea that evolution occurred via cladogenesis rather than anagenesis. So evolution as a branching phenomenon into a big tree, if you will, a tree of life, rather than a ladder leading to a single point. I will show more about this branching thing in a bit. She was also elected the president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, which she helped found with Alfred Romer. So the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology is the major society for people who study animals with backbones in paleontology. So me, but not everyone. There are lots of different fields of paleontology. She was the first woman president of the society, and she was also, as far as I can tell, the first Jewish president of the society. She was the 24th president overall, but given that there's a new president every year, that's actually pretty quick. So this was in the 60s. She received many awards throughout her life, including a variety of fellowships and honorary degrees, including a fellowship from the Guggenheim Foundation, the American Association of University Women, and a variety of honorary degrees from Wesley College, University of Gießen, and the University of Frankfurt. And there's even a street named for her in Frankfurt near the Seckenberg Museum, which is a fairly famous museum because it has a lot of important fossil finds. So here is that wonderful street sign for Tilly Eiger, which, you know, given that she had to flee Germany, is very nice, really. So there you go. The second most famous Jewish paleontologist, or first, just not for being Jewish, is Stephen J. Gould, who you may or may not have heard of. I call him the anti-Dawkins. So if you picture Richard Dawkins and you picture his polar opposite, that's Stephen J. Gould. So we get to claim him. Stephen J. Gould was born to a secular Jewish household in 1941. And he died of cancer in 2002, which I'm still sad about. He was a major contributor to a huge variety of paleontological fields. He essentially developed the theory of punctuated equilibrium, which is the idea that evolution doesn't happen at a constant rate throughout time. It responds to events in nature and sometimes goes faster and sometimes goes slower, which is the prevailing theory at the moment. He also contributed a lot to the field of evolutionary developmental biology, which is connected to paleontology, essentially studying the evolution of living things by looking at how they develop. And he pointed out similar things that show up in developmental processes in different organisms, including the idea of neoteny, which is when an organism retains juvenile characteristics as an adult, which we actually now think all birds went through neoteny, and that's why they look like that, in terms of the giant eyes and the big heads and the cute facial features. He talked a lot about directionless evolution, the idea that evolution does not go in a ladder towards a particular goal, but instead is just responding to changes in the environment. And this was very important because at the time, a lot of people still talked about evolution as a single process from primitive to advanced, rather than the more balanced and reactionary process that we now understand it to be. He was a huge debunker of pseudoscience, i.e., people who use scientific jargon or language, but just to bolster their own ideas. And in fact, one of his biggest contributions to debunking pseudoscience is debunking the idea of IQ and intelligence as a measurable quantity, which really connects back to his Jewish heritage, because as many of us probably know, IQ was commonly used to discriminate against Jewish people in the United States. He debunked it by talking about the different kinds of intelligences that there are, such as mathematical versus artistic. He talked about how the use of IQ was used to oppress various populations throughout history, not just Jewish people, but also Black people, Native Americans. And he also thoroughly deconstructed the idea of social Darwinism, or that society should function on an individual level as survival of the fittest, which is not only not how society works, but is not what Darwin's theory of evolution actually says. Evolution is about populations adapting to change, not individuals, which our society can be described as our population working together, making social Darwinism quite silly. And Stephen J. Gould was one of the first people to really demonstrate that. Now, he wasn't an uncontroversial figure. And if you look up Stephen J. Gould Jewish, you will find extensive writings between him and rabbis arguing about his concept of noma, or non-overlapping magisteria. He was a very passionate writer, and even though he himself was agnostic, he respected his religious friends and family, and he wanted to be able to hold both science and religion in the same space. And so his idea of noma, or non-overlapping magisteria, was the idea that religion should tackle questions of morality and ethics, which science can't do, and science should tackle questions about the origins of the world and how it functions. And this led to a lot of fighting between him and various rabbis who did not see it the same way and did not think that religion really contradicted science, all of the examples we discussed earlier with how Jewish responses to the discovery of evolution were more how Jewish tradition predicted this rather than how this contradicts Jewish tradition. So that conflict led to a lot of bad press for Stephen J. Gould, who is often seen by many people as kind of obnoxious, mostly because of that. What's interesting is that he was a very prolific author. He wrote a variety of books throughout his life. One of my favorites is the Book of Life, which is now quite outdated, but you can see even from the title, the Jewish influence in that he named it like a book of Torah. And it's a book that goes over the entire history of life on Earth as he knew it at the time. And it's structured in many places like a book of Torah, written in a similar style and with commentary on the side and extensive discussions, much like you see in Torah. Another book that he wrote was Rock of Ages, which is where he discusses non-overlapping magisteria. It's his main text on the interplay between religion and science, but he takes the title of the book directly from the common Hanukkah song, Ma'at Zor, Rock of Ages. His countless essays and published works essentially speak back to him being one of the people of the book, much more than most other paleontologists write in their lifetimes. And much of his writings take on a Talmudic-esque discussion with past philosophers and scientists, just talking about how their philosophies have held up over time and how they have not, much in the tradition of Jewish texts where rabbis talk to each other across history. We now move on to Roy Plotnik. He is a living paleontologist. He studies invertebrate paleontology, so animals without backbones, which is actually the majority of fossils because they usually have very hard parts that fossilize very easily. And he emphasizes the importance of the entire field, not just dinosaurs, and the need to understand the evolution of everything throughout life. Now, this is wonderful on its own, but he is also the author of the best scientific paper ever written, ever. Jurassic Pork, What Could a Jewish Time Traveler Eat? I love this paper so much. It was written in the mid-2010s. So in case you don't feel like looking up and reading it, it is free to read online, so you can. I am going to summarize it here for you guys. So when it comes to fish, only certain fish have the right scales, and that group of fish didn't appear until around 145 million years ago. So if we keep in mind that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, that's most of history, we couldn't eat fish. The only mammals that we can eat are those that are probably closely related to modern kosher mammals, because we have a very specific group of mammals that we are allowed to eat according to kashrut. They have to have split hooves, so even number of hooves, and they have to chew the cud. Now, animals that chew the cud are called ruminants, and they're all actually closely related to each other, indicating that the ability to chew the cud only evolved one time. So, to figure out which animals could chew the cud, because we can't tell based on fossils, it doesn't fossilize, we can create a phylogenetic bracket to determine which are most likely to. So here is an example of that branching phenomenon I discussed earlier, where life is a series of branches splitting off from one another, and it shows the relationship of different hoofed mammals to each other. I recognize that I said hoofed mammals, and some of you guys are reading the word whales on the picture. And yes, whales are hoofed mammals. I'll let you all sit with that. But as you can see here, the different animals that are actually able to ruminate or chew the cud, things like cows and deer, pronghorn, and as many are aware, giraffes, all fall within this group here, Ruminantia. I don't study mammals, so I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. And so what we can do is we can take the farthest branching group of the ruminants, the mouse deer here. In fact, I'll use a pen. That'll make it easier. The mouse deer here. Oh no, it's white. That's not what I want. So the mouse deer here. And then we can take the latest branching group, so that would be the giraffe, and we go back to their most recent common ancestor. So we make a bracket around the two. And we can reasonably suppose that any animal that falls within this group is able to chew the cud. Meanwhile, anything that falls outside of it probably can't. See how neither hippos nor whales chew the cud. As such, we can assume that only things that fall into this group are kosher. Unfortunately, that group only evolved about 50 million years ago. So we didn't have any mammals to eat until 50 million years ago. Now, very few birds and bird relatives would also be kosher, according to the paper. Very few birds today are kosher. They usually have to have a specific set of traits, including a particular kind of crop. And honestly, most of the birds that we consider kosher roughly line up with birds humans domesticated for food. Most extinct birds, therefore, can be ruled out, including all of the very large birds that existed in the past 66 million years. This also means that the group that birds evolved from, non-avian dinosaurs, and their cousins, pterosaurs, you might know them as pterodactyls, are also not kosher, because even though they don't really fit any of the categories that the rabbis or the Moses or whoever wrote the Torah in your understanding understood, they didn't have traits similar to kosher birds or kosher mammals, so they would not have been considered kosher. Kosher insects, grasshoppers and locusts, luckily first appear about 315 million years ago. So we do at least have bugs to eat for a good portion of geologic time. So what this all adds up to is that our options were limited to bugs, plants, and some fish at a point until around 50 million years ago. So if you do manage to come across a time machine and you want to keep kosher in the past, I recommend you pack food, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time. No, I have to erase that now. Okay. They're all drops. Okay. So now we move on to the second author on that paper, Jessica Theodore. She is a researcher of hoofed mammals, which is why she helped with the paper. She helped to write the hoofed mammal section and discuss ruminant mammals. She is the most recent president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. She is stepping down this year and is being replaced by Margaret Lewis. She will use the values of Tikkun Olam from Reform Judaism throughout her presidency and did a lot of amazing things. She expanded the diversity committee into this very large committee that actually has a lot of jobs, rather than the just kind of puppet committee it was previously. And she created the no tolerance policy for the Society on Burmese amber. So in Myanmar or Burma, there's currently a ethnic cleansing genocide type situation. And a lot of people being oppressed in that society are forced to dig up amber from this amazing fossil site where a lot of prehistoric animals are completely preserved within amber, including an entire baby dinosaur and the tail of a feathered dinosaur. But using these fossils is directly contributing to that human rights abuse and profiting from it. So she created the policy for the society that we are no longer allowed to study these specimens and remain in the society. Obviously, you can do what you want, but you'll get kicked out until these human rights abuses are addressed, which is directly related not only to her Jewish values, but also to our values as a people, as survivors of multiple genocides. She also helped to create grants for low-income country students. So we have a lot more grants in the society now for people who come from developing or global South countries, so that they are able to do paleontology, not just to be able to, but also so that they can do paleontology in their own homelands, rather than having people from America and Europe come in and do what we call parachute science, where they take advantage of low-income countries to do science and essentially take all the credit. And so she created grants to help fight against that, which directly relates to her Jewish values. In addition, like most Jewish people, she is a huge comedian. Most meetings with Jessica devolve into jokes very quickly, and she has a wonderful sense of self-deprecating humor. And as a Jewish woman and president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, she helps to carry on the tradition of Jewish woman excellence in paleontology that was started by Tilly Eidinger. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the people my age, so younger paleontologists early in their career or still studying. There are lots of us who are proudly and visibly Jewish. There's enough for a minion at every conference. Whether or not a minion happens, there's enough of us for it too. When I'm at conferences, I see many people around my age with kippot and Jewish-themed jewelry, to the point that we make jokes about it. And at this point, we've all decided to stop being surprised that there's so many of us at paleontology conferences. I recognize this is all anecdotal. I don't have scientific evidence or numbers about how many of us are Jewish. I just know that it is a very large number of us from my own experience. In addition, we tend to do silly things. So this is a cartoon of a feathered dinosaur saying it Hanukkah, Hag Sameach, just because we can. So there's all kinds of stuff like this on the internet because we're everywhere. And so because of this, integration of Jewish researchers has become a priority at events, with things like ID services and other forms of identification, and working at conferences being made Shabbat friendly, and making sure that kosher options and other things are present at events. I'm also going to mention the Zipporah Club. So my Hebrew name is Zipporah. I am not the only Jewish paleontologist who studies birds named Zipporah. There are 3 of us, and we have a club. Why is this funny? If you're not familiar, the name Zipporah means bird, and we study birds. So we find this very amusing. And it's not a very common Hebrew name, so that too. Now, I do have to discuss paleo entertainment, or movies, books, and the like that feature prehistoric life. Steven Spielberg, one of the more famous Jewish directors of all time. The man is obsessed with dinosaurs. Not just Jurassic Park and the Lost World Jurassic Park, though those are the most famous examples. He took the story in the books, which Michael Crichton wrote and were kind of anti-science, because Michael Crichton was kind of anti-science, and he made them into more of a nuanced and balanced perspective, celebrating the joy of life, celebrating creation, essentially, and the joy of dinosaurs, in addition to warning about how chaotic they are. And so his films became more of a nuanced take on chaos, creation, nature, order, all of that fun stuff. Now, as many people know, he worked on Jurassic Park at the same time as Schindler's List, which he has described in many interviews as a mistake, because it was very hard for him to go back and forth between the two projects, which have two extraordinarily different aesthetics, to say the least. But he didn't only create Jurassic Park and the Lost World Jurassic Park. He was also an executive producer for many of the prehistoric programming that existed in the 90s and late 80s. So he executively produced The Land Before Time, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, and the 1994 Flintstones reboot. Apparently, if a dinosaur project was being made in the 90s, Steven wanted to be a part of it, and I respect him for that. Now, Jeff Goldblum, also Jewish, also involved in Jurassic Park, was constantly involved in dinosaur projects in the 90s, possibly not through his own will. Multiple dinosaur documentaries made in the 90s, including episodes of Paleo World and the documentary When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, were narrated by Jeff Goldblum, which is just funny for me. And then we have Jon Favreau, who is a modern Jewish director who has created the landmark documentary series Prehistoric Planet. Jon Favreau has had a lifelong obsession with prehistoric life, with one of his early directing projects being about Neanderthals. And he loves bringing the past to the present in a way that people can see and can touch, much as how Spielberg tried to do the same with Jurassic Park. So if you haven't checked out Prehistoric Planet, it is on Apple TV Plus, and it's a good time. And it showcases what prehistoric life was like as we understand it today, helping to update people's perception of prehistoric life to the modern day. In addition to all of this, lots of dinosaur stories and fictional tales about dinosaurs are essentially retellings of the wilderness wanderings of Jews in the Torah. If you've seen Disney's Dinosaur, it's all about them wandering towards the promised land. Similarly, Land Before Time is about 5 children dinosaurs trying to reach the Great Valley, aka the Promised Land. There's a whole heck of a lot of dinosaurs need to reach the Promised Land in dinosaur fiction. And everywhere you look in dinosaur movies and television, you will find Jewish people behind the scenes working as animators, musicians, etc., putting this very Jewish feel into a lot of dinosaur stories. Now, I'm afraid I've talked too quickly, so we're at the end of my slides already. But in the vein of Jewish humor and dinosaurs, my friend Tyler Young and I created these wonderful prehistoric puns. So we have here a Brachiosaurus or Brachiosaurus. This is a Mosasaurus. Oh wait, it's a Mosasaurus because it's Mosasaurus. Yeah. Then we've got Rhamphorhynchus. I mean Rabbi Rinkus. So sometimes the fruit is low and we pick from the low-hanging fruit. Then we've got this wonderful fluffy friend, Velociraptor, Velociraptor. That one was a bit of a stretch. We also have Torosaurus. And finally, Mamenchisaurus or Mamenchisaurus. Hey. So I guess that leaves me with time for questions.
Okay, people, I'm gonna allow people to unmute themselves, raise their hands, but please raise your hand and then I'll call on you to unmute to ask questions. I don't see any hands yet. You have to raise your hand on the Zoom, everybody. There's a whole specific the thing. Okay, hold on. Okay, I'm gonna call on Ari.
Hi. So other he them here. But I was wondering, what was some of your favorite stuff about cladistics? Like, do you have any particulars that you like that really affirm and lead into like stuff for study, especially stuff from the past pertaining to the future?
So for those who don't know, cladistics is the study of how different organisms are related to each other. So if I go back through the puns, this chart here is what we often see in cladistics. So it's essentially family trees of organisms over time, showcasing how we're all related to each other. And I mean, it's the simple answer, but in cladistics, anything that evolves from a group remains a part of that group, meaning that because birds evolved from dinosaurs and are actually very firmly nested in dinosaurs, i.e. you can't really define dinosaurs without including them, that makes all living birds actual living dinosaurs. It also means that the story of dinosaurs did not end 66 million years ago. It has continued to the present day, and dinosaurs are arguably doing better than ever because there are about 20,000 living species of birds, possibly more. Meanwhile, non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the period were a little bit less diverse because larger animals tend to be less diverse. Birds have that many number of species because they're smaller now. Conversely, mammals, which usually are bigger today, only have about 6,000 species. That's a significant difference. And so it kind of challenges our assumption that life is going towards being bigger or more powerful, but rather life is just doing what it needs to do in order to survive, in this case, being small and fluffy and flying through trees. So that would be my favorite thing, is that birds are living dinosaurs and the story of dinosaurs didn't end, it just took to the skies. But thank you.
All right, we're gonna call on Cassie next.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Sorry, what?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, so my question is whether you have a diagram of a dinosaur brain, and is there evolutionary similarities to the human brain and the four lobes and their function?
So I don't have a diagram handy, but what's interesting is that the brains of animals outside of humans often have a very different structure, and they emphasize different things more than human brains do, in that the sensory parts of the brain are often a lot bigger. So what we can see in non-avian dinosaurs is an emphasis on smell and on sight that we don't really see in people. And actually what we've been able to determine from that is that dinosaurs, like their living representatives birds and their closest living cousins crocodilians, had extraordinarily good color vision, probably better than humans have. That's the big thing that I can think of for that one.
We're gonna call on Jessie next.
Okay, so I had a couple of questions. So first, I actually put this in the chat. Are the little honey dinosaur friends, are those available as stickers or something? Because I would love to get that as like a pack of laptop stickers or something. And the second thing I wanted to ask was, in terms of the paper, what makes it, what could a Jewish time traveler eat? Did he just do it from a scientific basis, or did he also consult with different rabbis?
So, Roy, Jessica, and Thomas Holtz, the authors of the paper, did both. They did a scientific basis discussing the different traits that are considered kosher, and they discussed with rabbis and looked at the different justifications and reasonings for different laws of kashrut within Jewish texts. So if you actually delve into that paper, and again, it's free online for anyone to read, you can see how they used both approaches to tackle the question, since it's both a religious and scientific one. As for the stickers, yes, they are available on Redbubble. I think the easiest way to send that out to everyone would be for me to give the link to My Jewish Learning and for them to send it out to people, but I can discuss that later.
Honestly, I'm gonna grab it right now.
Do you have the link to the Redbubble or just the pictures?
Oh, I imagine that they will be not terribly hard to find, so don't worry.
Okay, cool. I can.
Oh yeah, I have to pick the next person.
Yeah.
Sora.
Yes. Meredith, the librarian, doesn't have a microphone, so she asked online whether there are any book recommendations, especially children's books.
So my favorite book series for teaching kids about the history of life that's up to date is a series of graphic novels called Life Before Us. It's not written by a Jewish author, but it is an extremely balanced book of prehistoric life. It's also really cute. It's a cutesy, cartoonish drawing style. I would love to grab it, but I don't want to leave the camera right now. Yeah, they're right there. So I'm getting it to show. Grab the dinosaur one.
Dinosaur.
So it goes through the
Before Us, not Life Before Us.
Life Before Us. Okay,
Earth Before
Earth Before Us. Yeah. So it has these wonderful drawings, and so it's the story of this lady telling this kid all about prehistoric life. And so there's one for each of the major periods of life. So you've got the first one, which is about the Mesozoic, which is when all the famous dinosaurs lived. The second one is about the Paleozoic, so the time before dinosaurs. And the third one is the Cenozoic, or the time that we consider now. So since non-avian dinosaurs went extinct to today, all the weird mammals. So it just has an extremely cute drawing style, and it talks about all kinds of different things. It doesn't just focus on dinosaurs or humans or anything like that. And so it's very fun and engaging, and I recommend it to every kid who's interested in prehistoric life.
Thank you very much. We're gonna hop to Sharon.
My question is, were the dinosaurs cold-blooded or warm-blooded?
That is an excellent question, and paleontologists have been arguing about it forever. The answer right now is mostly warm-blooded. Any nuances within that are because some of them might have been more in between, which we would expect to see in the fossil record. And some of them were technically warm-blooded, but only because of how big they were. So it's this phenomenon called gigantothermy, where you're so big, you just generate your own body heat anyway. But most dinosaurs were active, very lively animals, and they were also more intelligent than we thought. And birds showcase that today. So mostly warm-blooded with an asterisk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Jordan has been waiting. Jordan, I know you've been waiting a long time, so I'm calling on you next.
Yes, well, for one thing, I would like to point out that it makes me as a Jewish person so very, very happy to see how back when Darwin first proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection, our people embraced it wholeheartedly. However, I've come to notice throughout this discussion that that all of the Jewish members of the paleontological community discussed have been members of the Ashkenazic community. I am myself on my mom's side. So I'm curious about is there any information out there about past and current members of the Sfaradi and the Mizrahi community is represented in paleontology, or perhaps resources, or perhaps any word on up and coming paleontologists from those specific parts of the diaspora?
Well, I know that this is actually a surprise, but I'm Sephardic, so there's that. I'm actually a Talkim, but yeah, I wish I had more information beyond that. I do not know of any people in like further on in their career than I am who are Sephardim or Mizrahim. But I do know that I am one, and I have a few friends my age who are. So we're here. We're just not that famous yet.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
I was so happy just when you asked that question. Michael, do you want to go next? If you are talking, I can't hear you.
You're still on mute, yeah.
Here I am. Okay. I'm sorry, I was late. Did you address a little bit about the Earth created in 7 days, as well as man? How do we explain dinosaurs versus the creation of man?
Right. So when evolution was first described by Darwin, I have to point out that other cultures had kind of come up with the theory of evolution earlier. Most rabbinical responses was about how the story of creation was allegorical, how the 6 days of creation could mean anything, and how do you define a day, and how the timing of the stories of the Torah become more firm with Adam rather than the 6 days prior. And so Kabbalah actually had this idea, 4 cycles of perfection that the earth had gone through to today, with us being at the end of the 4th cycle. And so the history of life can be roughly divided into 4 different groups. So you have the Precambrian, which is life before life got complicated, the Paleozoic, which is all these weird things that existed before the dinosaurs, the Mesozoic, which is the age of non-avian dinosaurs, and the Cenozoic, which is the age we're in today. And so rabbis actually assigned those 4 cycles of perfection to those 4 time periods. And so the idea that life descends and perfects itself over time was seen as confirmation of the process Hashem used to create the world, rather than contradicting it. And so ideas of young earth creationism actually only entered Jewish circles relatively recently-ish due to influences from Christian sources.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Ken. You are next.
Thank you very much. Very enjoyable presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question. Could the presence of gizzard stones in fossils of non-avian type dinosaurs signify chewing cud?
Well, the thing is that those gizzard stones in dinosaurs might not actually be gizzard stones. So I know when I was a kid, we talked about how sauropods had stones in their stomach to help digest food. Sauropods are long-necked dinosaurs. That's been debunked. It turns out they just died on top of stones. There are some non-avian dinosaurs that seem to have gizzard stones, but these are ones that are very closely related to birds. And so they were actually predatory dinosaurs, which would make them non-kosher because we're not allowed to eat predatory birds. So if a hawk isn't kosher, velociraptor wouldn't have been kosher.
Thank you.
Yep.
Marlene?
Thank you very much. First of all, there were some comments about Rabbi Lipschitz living over 100 years, but he was born in 1782.
I don't know why.
That might be a typo.
It's
Yeah,
probably
there's just
a typo.
Yeah.
in the
Yeah,
text.
sorry about that. Thank you.
I would not unmute myself to do your proofreading. I do have a question.
Okay.
And I've been meaning to ask a knowledgeable person this nearly my entire life. So you have the fossil evidence. I would like to know when one can estimate that the actual forming of a shell, as in birth taking place via an egg, when does that develop?
So, as far as we can tell, all animals that have a shelled egg, which we call an amniotic egg,
Yes.
because the egg is held in an amnion sac, they all are related to each other. We call the group Amniota, and that group first evolved around 330 million years ago. So we can suppose that the egg evolved in that most recent common ancestor of the group or close to it. So around then.
But initially, it was within the productive system.
So,
And so then,
sorry, keep going.
yes, so then my question is actually the egg which is then exuded from the, let's say, the birth mother, and that you actually...
Marlene, I am so sorry to interrupt you. We have
Yeah.
Kaddish in 2 minutes.
Oh.
Marlene, are you comfortable with me going through and finding your email to give to Meg, and you can ask them this question
Yes.
and be in
Yes.
touch? Is that cool? Fantastic. So sorry to end abruptly, everyone. And I hope to post the recording soon. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you all for coming.
Thank you,
you.
Meg.